Okay, good afternoon. This is the March 17th, 2022 informal hearing subcommittee of the Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission. This hearing is an informal process. It is a screening process to determine whether or not request for decertification should go on to the full Tennessee Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission for hearing. And that is the way that we will handle these. So we will begin with the first thing involving the matter of Brandon F. Simmons and the Estill Springs Police Department. I believe we have a court order and a surrender. Ms. Cooper.
That is correct. Mr. Brandon Simmons, formerly, as you said, of the Estill Springs Police Department, was indicted in the Franklin County Circuit Court for 1 count of aggravated assault and 1 count of domestic assault. He pled to a lesser count of simple assault, 2 counts actually. And as part of the condition of his plea was agreed to surrender his post-certification. And so I just need a motion to accept that surrender.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion from the commissioners? Hearing none, the question is to accept the agreement between Post Commission and Mr. Simmons. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, that passes.
Yeah. I won't say who's here.
Certainly. All right, we have Commissioner Wright, Commissioner Wagoner,
Here.
and Commissioner Cherry. Next things that we're going to be taking up are going to involve the matter of Terry Graham. Is Mr. Graham here with us? Okay, Crossville Police Department.
Yes, Terry Graham is here.
Okay, is Crossville Police Department here?
Yes, Chief Brooks with Crawford Police Department.
All right, Chief. We're going to roll through the roll just real quick to make sure that we've got all our parties, and then we'll move straight to you. All right. Do we have Christopher Tracy? Mr. Tracy?
Yes, sir. Christopher Tracy is present.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tracy. Memphis Police Department?
Memphis Police Department is present.
Thank you.
Mr. Rather, Mr. Tracy is represented by Tim Taylor, who may also be on the line.
Okay. I see
Yeah.
Mr. Taylor there.
I'm here.
All right, and then there is a Mr. Broderick Bolden. Mr. Bolden, you with us today?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bolden.
Yes, sir.
There's a representative from Dyersburg Police Department here. Okay, Chief Isbell is here. Commissioners, would y'all like to go ahead? It's your pleasure. Okay. All right. First thing we have to hear today is in the matter of Broderick Bolden. Mr. Bolden has answered the roll. Mr. Bolden was terminated after an internal affairs investigation had been ordered by the agency head. The investigation concluded that the agency's general orders concerning domestic violence had been violated. Representative from Dyersburg Police Department, if you would come up to the lectern. Chief, if you would identify yourself for the record, sir.
Dyersburg Police Chief Steve Isbell.
Chief, if you would explain to the commissioners what occurred in this particular matter.
Yes, sir. Thank you. This incident occurred back on July 23rd of 2021. It's a domestic violence call that Officer Bowden responded to. During the course of the call, supervisor was monitoring on radio, did not hear former Officer Bowden request a case incident number. Did a little more looking into it to determine that that Bowden had made the scene, was working the call, had not checked the subject for warrants and domestic violence orders, even though he had reported to the supervisor that he did. That was found to be false. It's also discovered that Officer Bowden had a personal relationship with both subjects. On the call, both the victim and the suspect. It was found that the victim and the suspect had been arguing all day. The male subject had scratches and bleeding on his face. Officers also discovered broken furniture inside the home. The victim had reported she'd been assaulted, had been hit, hair pulled out of her head. And there was also a no contact order between the two, and the male subject was charged with aggravated assault. This was by the supervisor, not by Officer Bowden. As a result of those findings, I ordered an internal investigation. The investigation concluded that there were a number of policy violations, specifically general order regarding domestic abuse. So there's a host of other violations. If you would like for me to go over each one of those.
I would assume that the commissioners would wish to hear that.
So in addition to the general order of domestic abuse that was violated, our standards of conduct, official obligations, general requirements, accountability, knowledge of orders, compliance with regulations, and satisfactory performance, discrimination. To define discrimination in our policy, its members shall at all times consider it their duty to be of service to anyone in danger or distress, and shall neither discriminate against, not show partiality for any person because of race, sex, religion, friendship, fraternal or social affiliations for any reason. Professional behavior, reports, truthfulness. Truthfulness reflects members must speak the truth at all times. In cases where departmental policy does not allow the divulging of all the facts known, members should inform the other party of such, refer them to the member's immediate supervisor. In this case, he had a relationship with both the victim and the suspect. Neglected duty, prohibited behavior, compromising criminal cases, and then into the classified services for the city of Dyersburg. Section 1, the importance of each employee. Every employee has the basic responsibility to project a good image throughout the community at all times. And the second section, employee conduct and working relations. Those are the charges. As a result of those findings, the judge to terminate Mr. Bowden's employment.
Commissioners, any questions for the chief?
I think I have one. He didn't call supervisor, he handled it himself.
That's correct.
Any other questions? Okay. Hearing none, thank you, chief. Mr. Bolden?
Yes, sir.
Okay, as we discussed briefly at the beginning, this is an informal hearing. You have the opportunity to speak as to this matter. So if you would like, you can tell the commissioners your side of what occurred in this matter.
Okay. As I started my shift that morning, I had worked, previously I'd worked court the same day, which was just about a regular basis for me. And these two were in court that morning, I remember. And so that way I know they ain't got no warrants or they wouldn't leave court to start with. And the judge, I remember the judge saying that he was going to drop the no contact order. And after that, I didn't pay any attention after whatever they was going on. I was reading my files. And as I was making my routine patrol, first of my shift, I drove by a house and the male subject actually flagged me down and said that his wife needed to use my phone to make a phone call. They had been arguing and they already had a place to go. So that's fine. I checked out at that residence, and as I was talking to him, I started to working as a domestic. And then as they kept talking, I'd actually called for a lap screen card and a supervisor arrived on scene with that and stayed with me throughout this ordeal. And as I kept listening to them talk, I couldn't determine if it was an actual domestic or they were just mad at each other. And these two were known to hurt themselves, so another one would get arrested. And after that, she used the phone. She already had a place to go, so she used the work phone. And me and the sergeant helped load her stuff up my patrol car, and took her then to the hotel where she had a room at, which ended the confrontation. No argument after that. After I left the hotel room, my supervisor contacted me on the phone and asked, did you check them for warrants and domestics? And I said, I did. And I said, wait a minute, I didn't check them. I checked the other guy that was at the house for warrants. I didn't recognize him. There was another person present in the house. And I said, I didn't check them two. I said, I checked the other guy. I didn't recognize him. I knew them two didn't have warrants due to them being in court that same day together. And he just told me to come back to the office and they're going to look into it. That was it.
Questions from commissioners?
This is Commissioner Wagner. So you're saying that you did call supervisor?
Right. I got on radio to dispatch, and I was out of lap screen cards, which is this card we use for domestics to determine the lethality. And when I realized I was out of them cards, I got on the radio, and the supervisor tuned in. He said, I'll be en route with the lap screening card. And it was just moments later, he arrived with it.
How long were you on the call by yourself?
I really don't remember.
Long
To be
time?
honest, it wasn't very long. No, it was probably 3-4 minutes, something like that. Maybe, yeah, somewhere in that nature, I'd say. I honestly don't remember. That's been
Yeah. And
a
how
long
long
time ago.
did it take the supervisor to get to?
Just within a couple of minutes. It wasn't 2 or 3 minutes and he was there. Long enough. When he arrived on scene, me and him told him what was going on. Me and him were back in the house, and we started talking to them separately, which is what we usually did. And then they said they wanted the other guy out of the house, and we had problems waking him up. He was on some type of narcotic or something, we assume. And we finally got him woke up, they told us his name already, so I checked him for warrants and sent him on his way. And then the phone calls were made, and she had her place to go, which resolved the situation. And that was basically it.
So this is Commissioner Wagner again. So you're saying you didn't violate any of the policies that the chief said you violated?
I did. The on the domestic part, yeah, I probably should have looked into it a little bit more. But at the time of my first talking to them, I couldn't tell if there was a domestic actually occurred because, yeah, and they were known to hurt themselves, then calling the cops. But yeah, I should have checked them for warrants and domestic violence.
So what advice did you get from your supervisor?
From my supervisor? None.
He just brought the card.
Right. He brought the card and stayed with me, and we talked to the subjects, and he helped me get the other guy up and get him on his way, and that was it.
Mr. Bowden, this is Commissioner Wright.
Mhm.
I've got a question. Reading through some of this, it says that you did have a personal relationship with them, but the type of relationship was unclear. Do you feel like it was a kind of relationship that you had both of them realizing that it was a domestic violence call, that you should have called another officer to come take that call?
No, sir. I've arrested my own kin folks in Dyersburg. It don't matter to me. And that type of relationship, it was, I used to build houses when I was years ago, and the guy actually worked on the crew I worked on, and I hadn't, you know, other than driving by and throwing my hand up and hollering out the window, "Hey, how you doing?" That was it. Which that was common for me to do all over the city with people.
Also, the Commissioner right again, also in here it says that you arrived at the scene according to dispatch records at 5:14, but didn't activate your body camera until 5:35. Do you recall if your supervisor had arrived before you had activated your body camera, or?
I don't remember. I do remember my body camera being off. When I worked court, I always had my body camera on me. And I worked court that morning. I went in, I took it off the charger, put it on for court. I left it off, and I just started my shift when this occurred. Just started my shift. And I forgot to reach down and hit on the back of my body cam, there's on and off. And I forgot to turn it back on so I could flip the button on the side that starts the recording. When I reached down and flipped it, I had it on, forgot what mode it's on. It's where it don't blink and make a sound. For when I'm walking up, I can flip it on and people not know I got the camera on them. And it was on that, and I didn't pay no attention until I took my camera off real quick in the car when I was going there to get my work phone out of the car. And I flipped it off, and I looked down because I couldn't remember if I flipped it on or not on the back part to turn the screen on. And when I looked down, I noticed it was off. Then I turned it on. The on button on the back.
And also reading through the findings of the fact here, it says that you arrived on scene at 5:14, and at 17:34, you called dispatch requesting another unit to bring the LAP cards, which would be 20 minutes later. So there was a period of time there, it appears, before the other one showed up, according to what the department has supplied.
Like I said, I don't remember the exact times. To be exact, it's been a while.
This is Commissioner Wagner, and you stated to me a while ago it was 3 or 4 minutes.
Right. It did. Like I said, it didn't seem that long at all. That's what I'm saying. I don't remember the exact times, but it didn't seem that long at all.
Could it
Enough
be-
for me to walk in and hear them talking. And she said, "I need to use your phone," and that they've been arguing. And I said, "Okay." That's when I went back to the back and noticed I didn't have a lap screen card in
Well,
my car, and I called for it.
What I'm asking you is, could it have been 25 minutes instead of 3 or 4?
Really, I'd be honest, I really don't know. Like I said, it didn't seem that long. Not at all.
None of the other commissioners have anything else. I'll make a motion, we'll move to full commission.
I said,
Right, commissioners, the motion is to move this on to the full commission. Any discussion? No discussion. All those in favor? All those opposed? This will move on to the full commission. Mr. Bolden, what will occur in that situation is that you will receive contact from the post commission, and they will set up a date for a hearing before the full commission that will hear this to determine whether or not this request for decertification will be granted. If you would get yourself into contact with the investigators with the post commission, and they will advise you from there.
That'll work.
Thanks, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank y'all.
since Sheriff Barton has shown up, and I need to be an alternate.
Yes, sir. For purposes of the record, we will show that Chairman Parton has arrived, and our voting members will be Chairman Parton, Commissioner Wright, and Commissioner Terry, with Commissioner Wagner being our alternate. Okay, in the matter of Terry Graham and involving Crossville Police Department, Mr. Graham pled guilty to reckless endangerment with no weapons involved. He received 6 months supervised probation and an additional 6 months unsupervised. Mr. Graham was placed on suspension on 4/12/2021. Post received the arrest notification on 11/8/2021. Mr. Graham is scheduled to return to court on 2/13/2023 to complete his probation diversion process. So it's showing good service, Ms. Cooper. All right. Crossville Police Department, if you would identify yourself for the record, please, sir.
Jesse Brooks, Chief of Police for Crawford.
Chief, if you would just tell the commissioners about what occurred in this matter, please.
Officer Graham was stopped while off duty by one of the Crossville police officers. Suspected he was under the influence. THP was called. THP arrested him for DUI. The next Monday, he was placed on unpaid leave and waiting for the outcome of the court case, was guilty or not guilty, whatever. In the meantime, he did work out a plea agreement. The plea agreement, he was placed on probation before the been actual conviction. How that works, I don't know. But the court system placed him on probation to a lesser plea agreement than the DUI, which was the reckless indictment. I sought the advice of the post. You know, I didn't feel like you could be on probation and be a police officer, and that was.
We heard.
The discipline on what would happen if he'd been convicted, he would be immediately fired. But on the advice of the resources, we're taking this route to see what happens. And hired him.
Questions from commissioners?
So this Chairman Parton, Chief, right?
Yes.
So he's still technically on administrative leave with the department?
No, he is a 18-year employee. He took another job with the city, which will take place tomorrow. And so he's taking another job with the city. And so he's technically not terminated from the police department, but he took a transfer to another job with the city government.
Okay, so he's got to change, definitely got to change his status.
Yes.
Are you in the city submitting for decertification? No, okay.
We're just asking for advice on how to handle this. And this is like this is probably.
Okay, I'm with you now, Chief. Okay. In times past, I'm aware of, and Ms. Cooper can correct me if I'm wrong with legal counsel, but anytime a police officer or law enforcement officer in the state of Tennessee is under the jurisdiction of any courts, even if they're put on probation, it is my understanding that their certification is kind of suspended until that probation is cleared or a diversion is done. You know, if he pleads under pretrial diversion, then he'll be eligible for an expungement. But it's my understanding, if you're under even if it's unsupervised probation, you're still under the custody of the courts. And I know of officers that have gotten reinstated and went on to have successful careers in similar situations after everything was, all the probation and unsupervised, they were free and clear of any of the court oversight is what's happened in the past. But it sounds to me like this officer has gone to work maybe for the street department or codes department or somewhere like that. But as far as the post certification, it would just be he would just change the status and he would just be inactive. Under the current situation that y'all have with the city of Crossville. Am I right in that, Ms. Cooper?
Yes, sir. While he's under probation, supervised, unsupervised, whatever it is, he cannot act as a certified law enforcement officer. And he is also ineligible to receive a waiver for his conviction, non-conviction, whatever it is at the point. So he would have to remain inactive during that time period. After he's done with his probationary period, assuming that he successfully completes and it's expunged, he won't need a waiver because at that point it disappears technically. If for any reason he violates it and does end up being convicted of a crime, I think you said he led to reckless endangerment, he would need a waiver for that and he would be eligible for that once he's done with his probationary period.
So basically what we're saying is he's just no longer an employee of the police department. You would enter in to the ACADIS or however y'all's agency does it, that his change of status is he's resigned from the police department. He is laterally transferred within city government to another department. And our status would be looking at it, he's just no longer an active police officer. Then if sometime down the road he decides, or your agency decides that you want to entertain reemployment, then you would have all paperwork and all paper and documents from the courts, and more than likely a possibility of an expungement. If there's an expungement involved, then there's nothing, it didn't happen, so to speak. I mean, you get the mulligan there, and you would just notify the post of a new hire. That's what I've known as how that has worked in the past.
That's correct. And to be clear, this would all not apply if you were asking for decertification. There are grounds to move
I
forward.
didn't ask for it.
Okay.
One thing I didn't want to terminate because of 18 years in TCRS. And on my advice and several of the police department, we asked him to seek employment someplace else because I never felt like we could ever employ him back at the police department because the charge.
Well, no, that's not necessarily true,
I'm
Chief.
talking about
It's, within the city, yeah.
The morally charge of DUI.
Well,
it's to the policeman not to do that.
And we see the city mothers and fathers will see how difficult it is to find folks in law enforcement. And DUI is a serious charge amongst us members. But there's light at the end of the tunnel. And he's not going to lose his TCRS because he's laterally transferred into another department and he's clicking right along. He's just not going to be out protecting and serving. He may be protecting and serving in a different manner, but there will be an opportunity down the road, unless a city administrator or mayor or somebody comes over the top of you and submits a decertification for some reason, then we would be meeting again and having another informal on that particular matter. But other than that, right now, that's the advice I know of to give you moving forward. And it's what advice you gave is really good advice.
Well, he's not, I think he's listening. He's a good person. And, he had a lot of crazy on his life at that time. The training board of law was broken, but I can sympathize with what he was going through.
Yes.
So I didn't want a lot of harm to come to him other than the punishment for violation of the law.
It's not the end of the world. Yes.
Chief, just one question. This is Commissioner Cherry. Is it your understanding that his charges are under judicial or trial diversion? Because we don't have those documents in the record.
We do.
Do we? Because
Yes, sir.
I didn't
There's
see
a
them in the packet.
pretrial in that.
It is pre-trial diversion?
It's a, yeah.
Okay, okay, never mind. Okay, my question was already answered.
Yep, sounds like you're pretty good shape all around.
We do need a motion to not move forward with any action on his.
I make a motion
Second.
to not seek any movement in this case.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Uh,
All right. Motion carries. Next thing on the agenda is the matter of Christopher R. Tracy. Mr. Tracy answered earlier, and the Memphis Police Department. And I believe Tracy has counsel Mr. Tim Taylor, correct?
That's correct, sir.
Who do we have on behalf of the Memphis Department?
From the Memphis Police Department, you have Lieutenant Colonel Sharon Cunningham and Lieutenant Colonel Chris Moffett.
All right. Colonel, if you would, go ahead and tell us about this situation, please.
Yes, sir. So the Memphis Police Department was requesting decertification of Mr. Christopher Tracy Christopher for neglect of duty on the date of occurrence on 8/10 of 2020. Mr. Tracy observed the vehicle driving at excessive speed through the intersection of Highland and Central. The driver made an abrupt stop into the parking lot, and Christopher Tracy, did the stop and determined that the driver was impaired. And he later also learned that the driver was responsible for hit and run nearby. He decided not to place criminal charges on the suspect and instead took the driver home. And upon taking him home, there was an altercation where the suspect, the driver, struck Mr. Tracy, Christopher Tracy, on the shoulder, and they had to use force and call for additional cars. But his reasoning for not making criminal charges is that he wanted to go home and did not want to deal with the DUI that was in place. But he resigned prior to the hearing. Also on the hearing date, there was a separate charge of compliance with regulations to with body worn camera, where he also was called, received a call to go to a location at 1106 Wilmore to advise a citizen of his wife with an attempted sexual assault, and where property was stolen as well. And the complainant in that particular case, the husband, stated that Mr. Christopher Tracy was very rude and humiliated him, put him in the backseat of the car, rather than giving him the information initially about his wife being sexually assaulted. But in that particular case, with the compliance with rules and regulations regarding the body worn camera, he also, again, resigned on 10/30 of 20 prior to the hearing. And the same thing for the neglect of duty regarding the DUI case that was held on 10/30 of 20. He also, it's also listed that he resigned before any disciplinary action was taken. Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
Just gonna see if the commissioners had any questions. Okay. Hearing none. Mr. Tracy and Mr. Taylor, do you
Yes,
have
sir.
anything that you would like to address the commissioners with?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Timothy Taylor. I am an attorney here in Memphis for the Memphis Police Association, which represents officers of the Memphis Police Department. Officer Tracy is obviously a former MPD officer and a former member of the MPA. He's now a law enforcement officer in Washington State. As Lieutenant Colonel Cunningham indicated, Officer Tracy resigned on October 30th, 2020, and he took up his new position shortly after that. The post commission provided me with a copy of the file of the documents that the city of Memphis provided the commission. Obviously, we have no dispute that his post certification is inactive because he's no longer a law enforcement officer in the state of Tennessee. But the Memphis Police Department's request for decertification doesn't meet the standards as we understand the post regulations. According to the documents provided to post from MPD, the reason for the request of decertification was the officer resigned with charges pending. And of course, as I understand the post regulations, they state that decertification is appropriate if there's a resignation with disciplinary action pending that could have resulted in termination. And this disciplinary action, neither one of these could have resulted in termination. First of all, there was no, based on the documents that were provided, there was apparently no internal affairs investigation into either one of these incidents. Officer Tracy was not asked to provide a statement to the Memphis Police Department Security Squad or Internal Affairs Bureau. He did not provide any statement, but he did provide a memo to his station commander on the incidents, but he was not asked to provide an ISB statement to Inspectional Services, which includes both Internal Affairs and Security Squad. The statement of charges that were issued, the first one was issued on August 12th, 2020. The second one was issued on August 31st, 2020. Officer Tracy was still an employee with the city of Memphis all the way up until October 30th, 2020. And yet he was never served with a statement of charges for either one of these incidents. And the documents that the city provided actually state that he was never served with the statement of charges, even though he was still an employee at that time, at the time they were issued. The hearing summaries from well, actually only one colonel did a hearing summary and just stated that the officer was never served with the statement of charges and he resigned. Now, the statement of charges themselves state that they were reviewed by the deputy director, the deputy chief, and the station commander. Both of them indicate that. Both of the statement of charges indicate that they were delegated to the station commander for a hearing. The one on August 12th, it was issued August 12th, was delegated to Colonel Joe Oakley. And then the one that was issued on August 31st was delegated to Colonel Jolly, who was in fact, I believe, Colonel Oakley's successor. They were at the same precinct. Colonel Oakley retired, Colonel Jolly took over. And attached to the affidavit that I provided from the Memphis Police Association from Officer Officer Covington, who is the chief steward for the MPA and of course a law enforcement officer himself. Under MPD policy and procedures, a colonel cannot impose a discipline in excess of 20-day suspension. They can impose anything from a written reprimand or an oral reprimand up to any day suspension up to 20 days. But they cannot terminate an officer. Only a deputy chief, deputy director, or the director can terminate an officer. The fact that these charges were delegated to colonels is consistent with the fact that the Inspectional Services Bureau did not investigate this. Usually if a allegation rises to the level that it may result in a termination, the police department's inspectional services, IAB or security squad will investigate that. They will take a sworn statement from the officer under oath on his signature The officer will have the opportunity to have representation by a member of the MPA with him at the time of that statement, et cetera. None of that happened. So because these charges apparently arose within the precinct, there's no mention of an ISP investigation. Officer Tracy can confirm that he did not give an ISP statement on either one of these charges. These arose from the precinct, and that is consistent with having a precinct commander have the hearing on it. And under MPD policies and procedures, a colonel cannot terminate an officer. I have to point out that this is the second time this has happened with the city of Memphis in the past year and a half. We had another officer who resigned. It was heard back in September of 2020 by this subcommittee. The officer's name was Juan Johnson. His certification number was 8947-1523. And in that case, there was an ISB investigation. He gave a statement, ISB investigated it, issued a statement of charges, and that officer resigned before the statement of charges was served. But as in this case, the statement of charges was delegated to a colonel, and a colonel cannot impose more than a 20-day suspension. And on that case, this subcommittee recommended that no action be taken on the MPD request to be certified. So we would submit that, while the department, certainly can originate a statement of charges from a precinct and, issue a statement of charges, under policy, a colonel cannot fire an officer. And as a result, this request for decertification does not meet the post-certification rules that require the officer has to resign while charges are pending that could result in termination. And none of these charges could. And I'd be happy to address any questions that anyone has.
Any questions from commissioners?
I'd like to hear a rebuttal from the city department as to that attorney's statement.
Yes, sir. With respect, I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Lieutenant Colonel Moffitt. With respect to the internal affairs investigation, Lieutenant Colonel Christopher Moffitt is also on. He can speak to the statement provided by Mr. Timothy Taylor, Attorney Taylor. Thank you.
Yes, Attorney Taylor is correct. There was no ISB investigation. And as far as the amount of discipline, the level of discipline a colonel can impose, the limit is 20-day suspension.
This is Commissioner Wright. I guess this question would be for Memphis Police Department. If Mr. Tracy had not resigned, what disciplinary action would he have received?
Being heard at the colonel's level, the limit would have been 20 days. I can't begin to forecast what that discipline would have been. The statement of facts that I've seen that the workstation handled are clear to me, but without a hearing, I can't tell you what would have happened and what would have transpired.
Okay, this is Commissioner Wright again. I guess kind of what I'm trying to understand is Memphis PD's departmental policies. Does it go to the colonels? Colonels then either do recommend up to 20 days. If it requires more than 20 days, would they then get internal affairs involved to investigate? How does that process work? Would it stop?
So there's so the workstation, I'm sorry.
Or my question was, or would this just have stopped at the lieutenant colonel where it did?
The colonel, had this gone to a hearing, the colonel would have had the hearing enacted whatever discipline he or she deemed appropriate, and that would have been the end of it.
Mr. Taylor, this is Sheriff Parton. Why did your client resign if he was just looking at possibly a 20-day suspension.
He had accepted a job in Washington State as a law enforcement officer. He took that job within a few days after resigning.
Okay.
And that's where he is now.
I'll make a motion to take no action.
Second.
Motion is on the floor is to take no action on this matter. Those in favor? Aye. All opposed? All right, motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, members of the commission. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioners, that's the last thing we have on the agenda.
Before we adjourn. I apologize for my tardiness, but I-24 was amazing.